So today, we're going to be looking at a scenario where the top 5 strongest WICSO countries go to war with the rest of the real world. Now, it has been a while since I've last done a WICSO related video, being of course the April Fool's video, and before that, the actual finale of the series, so I thought that it was probably around time that I bring back some kind of aspect of the series. Today, we're looking at a war scenario between the 5 strongest powers and the actual real modern world. So the countries I selected were the Old Empire, arguably the strongest country in the series. With them, we have World War III Russia. We also have modern Dutch team, which was in like episode 100. We have these World War IV China over here, or no, World War V China. And then similarly, we have World War V America. So these are, in my opinion, some of the strongest countries in the series. Of course, with different eras, different countries were stronger. These were just some like the most notable ones I picked out. So if you guys do enjoy today's scenario, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. As always, all the support is greatly appreciated. If you want to show even further support, make sure to check out our channel membership program. With all that being said, let's go ahead and jump straight into this video. So we are going to assume here that the WICSO countries will kind of overtake the militaries and the economies of the modern day. So like, they had the same strength as modern day Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, all those countries, so that is the Old Empire, of course. And then the Russian country will have all the strength of current day Russia, plus all of Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, the Baltics. So these countries are actually like pretty strong. But with that being said, let's go ahead and jump straight into the war scenario. So we will start off over here in Europe, where this continent is absolutely screwed. The Old Empire will be the first country to make a move here, sending their troops right across the border and into Kosovo, taking up Pristina, occupying northern Albania before then entering straight into Montenegro. Over on the Romanian front, they already kind of have Bucharest, but they will go ahead and officially take that series in full, while also wiping out the rest of Bulgaria, and starting an offensive heading straight towards the border of Russia. Now, of course, all 5 of these WICSO countries are working together on the exact same team, which is especially why Europe is screwed. The Old Empire will also start moving up from Italy, going straight towards and capturing San Marino, while the Dutch will also begin to send forces down into Europe, taking over the rest of Germany, and now entering straight into Austria, capturing Vienna. They'll capture Bratislava over in Slovakia, and extend across the border of Russia, entering into northern Hungary, and taking over Budapest. Now, as for Russia, they're going to be having a very, very easy war scenario here, because they don't really border any strong countries. Their biggest opponent is probably real-life China, who is very weakened. So Russia will make the decision to, in coordinate with their allies, to go ahead and join up in the war in Europe. They will go ahead and capture the capital city of Moldova. They'll meet up with old Imperial forces down in the south, cutting off Europe from the Black Sea completely. I don't know why I said incomplete. I'm just really dumb. But yeah, Russia will move down, and together they're going to work with the Old Empire, which is something that was not said very often in the series, to wipe out Romania, and then of course the Old Empire will move into Serbia. And all in all, the Balkans are relatively cooked here. They don't stand much of a chance at all. But let's go ahead and jump over to a different front line now over here in Asia. The Old Empire will move very quickly to wipe out the rest of Turkmenistan before moving up and taking out all of Uzbekistan, and then entering into the southern areas of Kazakhstan, capturing all of the bodies of water here. They will also move out into what should have been their puppet state. Now that I'm realizing it, it's not here for some reason. Neither is the one in Africa, but it's okay. They weren't really strong anyway. As you can see, this puppet state is literally like Chad and Niger. Anyway, though, the Old Empire is very familiar with fighting wars in this region, so they, of course, are going to gain the upper hand initially. And all in all, the rest of the world so far is losing a lot. We now come over here to China, who has probably the most interesting front line to fight. That is because they still have to fight South China, who, was a thing in the WICSO universe, but is also a thing here, posing as Communist China. So they are going to utilize pretty much all of their forces to go down and initially focus on this, because that is their biggest opponent as of right now, of course. They're also going to send forces up into Manchuria. They'll capture these two capital cities here. They'll wrap around the Yellow Sea and then eventually meet up with the border of North Korea. However, over here on the border of India, we see Indian and other Southeast Asian forces working together to begin to push back the Chinese influence, so they will enter into their country and get pretty deep in before ultimately stopping and coming to a halt between their forces. But China here is in a very vulnerable spot, and they're definitely going to need the help of the other WICSO countries if they want to last much longer. But now coming over here to the only country in the Americas, America. And kind of similar to China, they have to fight off their real-life equivalent. So the United States is still here, although splintered into 3 different areas. There is the western area, kind of also the northern area. Then you have Texas down in the south and New York up in the north. America would probably focus on wiping these guys out first, you know, very populated up here in the northeast. Without this, the United States, I should say, is in a pretty bad spot, so America will focus up there. They're also going to move down and capture this city down here in Texas, which I think is Dallas or Houston, or nope, that's San Antonio. I was way wrong. But America will also focus down here, now going down towards the border of Mexico. But also, very similar to China, they're not going to necessarily have that big of a cakewalk over here because the Western U.S. is still relatively powerful. You know, you have California here, who is one of the best GDPs in the world, very populated, a lot of manpower there to throw at America, who is also fighting against, once again, the entire continent of America. So they're definitely also going to need the help of their WICSO friends over here in Eurasia. Speaking of these guys, the brown team will now start an offensive that will focus on the UK, and the UK here has lost England over to the brown team, and England really is like a lot of the strength that the UK has, because up in Wales and Scotland, there aren't that many people, and the Dutch team, even if it were real, would have a very easy time moving in and taking out these areas, and with that, they would also have a pretty easy time moving across the Atlantic Ocean there and taking over Ireland. I don't know what this section of water here is called. British people, let me know down in the comments below. But now that I'm thinking about it, the Dutch should also probably have control over Iceland, but since they don't, they're going to go ahead and take it. Yep, that would be really easy for them to do. And now, as you're seeing here, the Dutch team is doing a lot of work in wiping out a lot of the western areas in Europe, while the old empire and Russia work together to take out the southern Balkans and likely the Nordic countries, although this is probably going to be between Russia and the brown team. So for now, the brown team will go ahead and continue their advance out from their own territory, now going into France, who has lost a lot of their major cities. They are going to lose Brittany, and the Dutch are going to be on the advance straight down towards Spain. So they'll set up a geographical defensive line here, while also now sending troops over into Italy, and Switzerland, yeah, they're full of mountains, but they would fall eventually. And the Dutch team will take Milan and start moving deeper into Italy. Now, down over in the front in Africa, I do believe this is where the old empire would have some troubles, because the entire African continent would be united against them. And, Africa in the real universe isn't as weak as Africa in the WICSO universe, for sure. So the combined strength of this entire continent might be enough to rival that of the Old Empire's claims over in Egypt, although we do have to remember that the Old Empire controls all of Egypt, so, Egypt versus Africa, Egypt would be able to hold off for a little bit, but not long. Add in the rest of the Middle East, and, they might be able to hold off for a little bit longer. Still, though, they are at a disadvantage here, and the Old Empire will additionally lose some of their coastlines over here in the Horn of Africa area. They're going to lose that over to the rest of Africa, but they aren't necessarily prioritizing this front line right now. There are much more important front lines, like up in Europe, which is where they will be expanding into next, so they will send their troops across, capture Belgrade over in Serbia, before also capturing Sarajevo out of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Russians will continue their advance very slightly into Hungary and northern Serbia, but will eventually stop to pursue Finland, so this will allow for the Old Empire and the Dutch team to go ahead and finish up the rest of the Balkans. So the Old Empire moves up, captures the capital city of Croatia, followed by the capital city of Slovenia. Some troops will be encircled over here on the Adriatic coast, which will lead to their non-existence. Additionally, the Old Empire will also move their forces in Italy further up, meeting up with Dutch team forces and also encircling more troops over here. Same story as last time, they no longer breathe oxygen. And then they will capture Venice, wrapping around the Adriatic Sea completely. So we are at the point now where WICSO has been completed for 2 months, which is kind of crazy. It will be 2 months as of yesterday, on Friday, May 15th. This video is being posted on the 16th. So it's been a while since it's ended now, and I can talk a little bit more about the series. I'm sure most of the people watching this video are fans of WICSO, so, I gotta keep the community alive between now and the next mapping series. So let's talk about the Old Empire here, who, I've claimed over and over again isn't a main character in the series. Despite them being the strongest and lasting a very long time, there's been a lot of arguments that have said that I favor the Old Empire. And, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I have denied multiple times that the Old Empire was ever a main character in the series, and I'm still going to stand by that. They were never a main character, but they became very, very important for the story, and they're going to remain very important for the story of WICSO. And that's not because I necessarily have like a favoritism towards the Mesopotamia area in the series or anything, but it's also mostly because this is where civilization actually began, down here in southern Arabia. This area in the series was considered very holy, and with that, I just kind of, related power to it. So this old, long-standing country, civilization is the oldest here, very rich. So I just kind of equated that with power, and that made the Old Empire so strong. I never intended them to be like a main character, but they kind of played that role in World War III, World War IV with the whole, coalition, the willing thing. And even them coming back in the end and also in the epilogue of the series where they formed like a ginormous old empire. So it has to do with history, and it also has to do with like fan favoritism, because without a doubt, the old empire is like the most favorited country in the series. I'm literally wearing the merch right now, Old Empire, so by the way, still available at atismerch.com. But yeah, another country we could talk about is over here in China. Now, China is a very old country. It's very long-standing. Its borders haven't changed too much in its history, and that's something that I grew to hate towards the end of the series, because I feel like, all these old countries had to go. And that's what I ultimately ended up doing with like getting rid of Rome. A lot of people didn't like me getting rid of Rome. So I brought it back because of popular demand. But China was one that's like, not like a super fan favorite. So I wanted to get rid of it. And ultimately I kind of did that and made it green, which in hindsight was a really bad idea. I don't know why I did that. It would have been better just to keep its color. But then again, I really wanted to change this area so that China wasn't so static throughout its history. So I made it green, the whole different name, whole different flag, government, whatever. But ultimately, I probably shouldn't have done that. Anyway, though, back to this video. I'll just continue my normal commentary now. America has now captured the city of Salt Lake City, I believe, which is in Utah, which, not very important, but they will now move across and capture the city of Las Vegas, which is a big loss for the gambling industry over in the US of A. Their front over into New York will continue now. They're going to go ahead and capture the city of Providence? No, maybe Hartford. I have absolutely no idea what city that is, but they are getting relatively close to Boston. However, what you'll notice over here in the America front line now is that their front in Texas is beginning to fail, and that's because reinforcements from South America have finally arrived, and they are now pushing straight into San Antonio and recapturing that city for the USA. And overall, like I was saying earlier, America and China are in pretty bad spots unless they get help from the big three over here in Afro-Eurasia, which, they're just about done finishing off Europe. So on that note, let's finish off Europe. Russian troops will now move over into Finland. They're going to go ahead and easily capture the Kola Peninsula from what remains of Russia. They'll move up. Finland was going to fall anyway, but now they're officially gone. After finishing off the British Isles, the Dutch team will now also begin to send forces up into the Swedish area, which in the series was Norway, a longtime rival of the Dutch team. Unfortunately, for modern Norway, though, they are a lot weaker than their WICSO counterpart, and the Dutch team is going to have a field day moving up here. They wish it was this easy in the series, but, Norway, they're just kind of, they were like that in the series. They lasted a very long time. And for all those who are wondering, yes, Norway was one of my favorite countries in the series, along with the Farmers Republic. I try not to talk about my favorites personally, and I always said that I never had favorites, which, I don't have any, countries that I would alter the story over because I like them so much, but, Norway and the Farmers Republic, those were two of my go-tos, I'd say. Anyway, though, as you can see here, the Scandinavian countries, they're going to go ahead and surrender. The Dutch and the Russians are successful in wiping out the entire Nordic slate up here, meaning that now they can shift their focus to the rest of the world, and, well, that's not good. So the Dutch team is going to start to focus in on Spain down here, and this is where they're slowly but surely going to start to slow down, because as of already, the Dutch team has taken out a lot of countries, not a lot of strong countries, but, France, Norway. So, that adds up. This is still a modern country, so they're not going to be, untouchable. With that being said, they probably will still win down here in Iberia, but not as quickly as they won elsewhere. The Old Empire, though, they finished off their front line in Europe, and they're going to go ahead and capture Sardinia and Corsica, before now shifting their focus to Africa and South Asia. Now, arguably the most important region for the Old Empire to fight in is South Asia, because we have the strongest country in the world there, India, or I should say the strongest remaining country in the world, because the big three, they all got cut up by the WICSO countries. And I almost brought back Persindia instead of America, but then I kind of thought that it would be boring if we didn't have a WICSO country over in the Americas, although I would say that Persindia was definitely way more notable and probably more powerful than America was at some point in their respective era. Still, though, we have to have some balance here, so India had to remain as a way to kind of hold off the Old Empire and even, maybe even win against them. We'll see. But for now, we have Old Imperial forces capturing Kabul before also moving over and taking the capital city of Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. Meanwhile, though, we see a absolute sweep of WICSO Russian forces moving throughout the Siberia area. They will easily take this land over because there's nothing there. And they're going to help China out now over in Manchuria and southern Russia. Their troops will come down and squish any kind of opposition. Whoa, I just had a stroke. And this is what WICSO China ultimately wanted to happen, because now they have that kind of leverage of Russia to their north, who, Russia now only has really one front line to focus on, and that is over here in this kind of Central Asia region. Back over in the Americas, we have American WICSO here, now moving out and taking over a lot of this Rocky Mountain region in here, just kind of moving into vacant space. Really, they're trying to demonstrate to the Americas as a continent that, you know, they're not super weak, and that they're surely not going to be the first country to fall in this war, especially as they start to approach the west coast of the USA. But notably, they are being outnumbered here by the whole America continent, and you have to remember that the USA is still here, meaning that they are likely sharing their weapons and technology with the entire continent and entire world. And, you know, America has that same technology, but they're fighting against the technology that they're using. So they're not necessarily as untouchable as the USA is in real life, in comparison to other countries around it, because the USA is working with those other countries. So we see slight progress on their front in pushing back against America. They will retake Las Vegas and Phoenix, but where we see a lot of struggle here from the blue team is actually over here in the northeast, as American troops now cross the border over into Canada and approach the city of Toronto. We also see Boston fall over to WICSO American forces, as the northeast region begins to crumble, and a lot of Canadian cities are in risk of being captured. Back over in Europe, we see the Dutch team move down and capture Madrid from Spain, and old Imperial forces begin to nudge back against African forces, although at a very alarmingly slow rate. And that's because we have old Imperial forces largely being engaged with Indian forces over here in South Asia. Those same forces are also working with partners down in Oceania and Southeast Asia to push back against Chinese forces down in South China. The blue team will definitely be feeling pretty good if they're able to capture a lot of these major cities down here, which is exactly what they're able to do, recapturing the Hong Kong area and pushing all the way up to the actual border of WICSO China. Meanwhile, though, we have WICSO Russia finally starting their advance into the Central Asia region, helping out the old empire and ultimately China in beating back some of the more stronger forces remaining in the modern world, of course being mostly in India. Now, one of the most important aspects of this war that we haven't really talked about yet is resources. And the Middle East is full of them. More importantly, the most important resource in the world if you want to fight a war, oil. Every single oil rig in the Middle East is controlled by the WICSO countries, and you also have like all of Europe being under WICSO control. It's full of lumber, resources, things you need to build stuff. You also have Russia being Russia, so all of Russia's real-life resources, plus a lot from Central Asia and the Eastern European region. See, look, I keep having a stroke when I record. It's like I'm talking too much too fast, which is just kind of how I record videos, so I just gotta get better. Kind of the point of the blip videos, if you will. But there's also America, which is full of resources and population, but they are at a disadvantaged spot at this point, which is why we're coming back over here and discussing the pushback of Western USA forces, now reaching to the border of America, and now working together with South American and Central American forces. They will push straight into actual core American WICSO territory, and they will capture the city right over here. That is Houston. So the tides are beginning to change over in the Americas, very similar to what's happening over in China, and the big three over here in Afro-Eurasia are still trying to lock down their borders. Back over in this theater, we have the old empire's military being pushed back by those Indian and Pakistani forces. Kabul will be recaptured by the blue team, as well as the capital city of Kyrgyzstan, not Tajikistan. No, wait, no, this is Tajikistan. I might have called it Kyrgyzstan earlier. And it's at this point in the video that I want to ask you guys a very important question, which I still not really sure how to answer, and that is, which side is stronger? Do you think these 5 strongest WICSO countries are stronger than the whole rest of the world, or do you think the rest of the world still has a pretty decent chance at beating them? I don't know, honestly. And I'm starting to think about that when I'm trying to conclude this video. I have an answer in mind, and I'm not sure if it's realistic, but then again, you know, I made these WICSO countries, so I can say how strong they are and how weak they are. I have finally defeated the realism argument. There is no realism. These countries are fictional. But still, though, these are modern areas of land controlled by countries. So let me know, which side do you think is stronger? You'll find out my opinion by the end of this video. Well, back over in Iberia, we have Dutch forces now moving across and going straight over into Portugal, which they will do, and Lisbon will be captured. And from there, both of these countries will surrender, meaning that the whole European continent now has been captured by WICSO forces. Not a good sign for the rest of the world. However, though, what is a good sign for the rest of the world is the fact that China has been completely pushed out of South China, and now using all of this land and population down here, a full-scale advance into WICSO China will be started by the modern world. And WICSO China here is in a really bad spot. They're definitely going to need the help of Russia, who has been kind of lollygagging over here in Central Asia, although they are still pushing down, though, meeting up now with those Indian forces that just pushed back against the old empire. For the 5th time in this video, not really, but feels like it, the capital city of Tajikistan will be captured. But over in Africa, we have a pretty stunning defeat for the old empire here, as their claims in Africa begin to very, very, very quickly wash up. What am I saying? Adis Pro has yet another stroke while trying to commentate his mapping videos. And a voice crack, man. This day couldn't get any worse. Anyway, though, the old empire is now going to be kicked all the way out of Africa. Now, if you remember in the actual WICSO series, this happened to them when they were fighting against the Horn of Africa down here, and Libya and the other countries against them in whatever war that was. World War III? 4? One of the two? It was World War III. I don't know how I don't remember that. But, you know, that was only a few countries in World War III. This is the entire continent of Africa, so yeah, very clearly the old empire would lose in that theater, despite them being, you know, plot armor man themselves. Speaking of losing, now coming back over to the Americas, we have the non-American WICSO countries pushing in deeper into American territory. They will capture New Orleans, and then move up and capture this city here, which I think might be Oklahoma City, but I don't think it is. It is Oklahoma City, so the Thunder are dead. Everyone in the NBA can, you know, clap their hands now, thank God. No dynasty for you, haha. You get ready for the Wizards dynasty, yo. We got the #1 pick. You know, I talk about sports sometimes in my videos, but it's like speaking Chinese to an American from Mississippi. Like, they don't know what you're saying at all. Anyway, the Canadians, they're pushing back. And you know how rare it is for Canadians to push back in my videos? Canada, whenever they're in a war with their southern neighbor, they almost always instantly get wiped out. But here, they've recaptured Boston, recaptured the city that I really don't know what it is, and America here is in trouble. Especially as the Venezuelans land in Jamaica, the Uruguayans land in San Marino. San Marino? What is wrong with my brain? I don't know how I said San Marino. This is Puerto Rico, but I think I was going to say San Juan, which is the capital of Puerto Rico, but yeah, San Marino is definitely the most incorrect I've ever been before. Wow. Anyway, the Argentines are in Hispaniola, and the Brazilians are in Cuba. Speaking of Cuba, it is now fully Brazilian. The Bahamas are taken over, and we can see here that WICSO America is starting to dwindle in the face of the entire America's continent. Now, WICSO America, obviously, you know, they're not as strong as actual real-life America. They are about 2 times smaller than real America, so it does make sense that they would lose, especially considering that, you know, actual USA would very barely be able to hold on against the rest of the Americas in real life. That is, you know, especially if they're fighting a defensive war and not an offensive war. But here, WICSO America is simply just, you know, outnumbered by the rest of the continent. So, these blue team forces will begin to pour straight into WICSO America. They will begin to liberate a lot of the central Midwestern plain area. Wisconsin will be recaptured, and so will Michigan. And with that occurrence, we have American WICSO being kicked all the way out of Canada, and also their front line over in New England begins to shrink, and they are in desperate need of some help, which probably won't come because the rest of the world is very busy right now. We have the Dutch team now moving down forces into Africa, specifically into Morocco, which they'll go ahead and start to capture their capital city, but similar to the old empire, they're a little bit outnumbered by all the forces down here. Back over in China, this continues to go in the favor of the real world as they push further up China's coast, capturing these major cities here, and also taking over Taiwan from WICSO China. In Central Asia, we have WICSO Russia now going down towards Islamabad, but they will be stopped in their tracks, and they will actually end up losing this battle over to the South Asian military. Speaking of that military, they are still pushing back against the old empire over here in Afghanistan, and are now even pushing them back in the Persia area, meeting up with their actual real-life border. Well, not real-life border, but, you know, core territory border, which is maybe telling of how this war is going to start to go for the WICSO countries. You have to remember, they expended a lot of forces taking out Europe. They expended a lot of forces taking on China, which, you know, China itself didn't do a very good job at, as you can see. And for the modern world, what they are really banking on right now is American WICSO being finished off, which will allow for all the troops in the Americas to come over and help out everyone else in the old world. Once that happens, you know, it could be wraps. The USA will likely annex American WICSO, meaning that they're back to full power, and with a full power USA here, who, you know, might have to rebuild for a few years, but still, that's not really what these guys want to see happening at all. So the old empire will pull their head out of the sand, and they will begin to push back that South Asian military, and they're going to immediately re-enter into Pakistan and Afghanistan. We have Russian forces helping out Chinese forces and clearing up a lot of this area over here, which will go over to the Russian military. Still though, the world is really banking on pushing back in the southern area over here, with this initiative being largely led by Southeast Asia, Australia, Indonesia, Japan, and Korea. Both of them. I forgot that they're fighting on the same team, which almost never happens. But speaking of this area, they are now pushing into China. And they're also pushing back against Russia, who has their forces all over the place right now. This is a very large-scale war, so, organizing that is going to be difficult for everybody, no matter what side they're on. Back over in the Americas, though, this is where we're finally going to see the fall of a WICSO country, as the rest of this continent will begin to start to spearhead into certain major cities, taking over areas like over here in Pittsburgh, moving down and taking over DC from America, which is not their capital. Their capital is actually down here in South Carolina. Doesn't matter though. America is also probably on the weaker side of the WICSO countries here. Definitely, maybe stronger than China, but not strong enough to fight the Americas by themselves. And don't get me wrong, this would take a very long time to complete. This is still a lot of the core USA territory, but over time, we have the victory of the world in taking out the first WICSO country, being WICSO America. And with that, the fears of the old empire and the rest of their team have come to fruition, as the new world will begin to send their troops over to fight their forces in the old world. More specifically, they're going to be fighting in Africa, specifically against Dutch and the old empire, leaving the rest of these guys to fight up against China and Russia. And so far, they've been doing a pretty good job considering the opponent that they're up against. But we see the first little bit of help happening down in Africa as the Dutch team is expelled from Morocco. And while we might see more and more of this area of China fall up to the Himalayas, we do still see a lot of significant progress being made by the blue team in taking out China, especially now as they move up and begin a battle in the city of Beijing, which is the unofficial capital of WICSO China. This will, of course, motivate the rest of the blue team to actually do something, as both Korean countries and Japan will push China all the way back to their front line. They will then cross that front line, aka border, in the Chinese territory, heading straight towards Beijing. They'll meet up with those forces in the south, and together with their now combined force, they will take over the capital of WICSO China. And now with that happening, the rest of China is pretty much screwed, as the real world will go ahead and start moving and taking over these major cities until WICSO China is pretty much on its last breath, being held up solely by WICSO Russia. This will allow for the blue team to even push back against WICSO Russia over here, who was being helped out a lot by Chinese soldiers who were holding on to this territory. Now, of course, those soldiers are being recalled into China to save the empire. So all in all, it is a frontline collapse over in China. They will retract their occupational forces in Mongolia and actual real-life China, leaving them to Russian control. Back over here in South Asia, the old empire has had enough, and they are now going to utilize their full potential. They are sending about all of their military forces straight down into South Asia, and more specifically into the nation of India, taking over a few major cities from them and Pakistan before then starting to head straight towards New Delhi. This is a rapid shift in momentum for the war, and if India is the fall, the rest of the world might be in trouble, although it's not guaranteed. Back to WICSO China though, they are going to officially surrender over to the real world now after losing a majority of their territory, which is going to once again demonstrate a momentum shift in this war, because now it's the big three in WICSO versus the rest of the world. The old empire, Russia, and the Dutch team versus the modern world. At this point, it is important to note that the real world is probably utilizing their occupied territory to fight the war against the WICSO countries, so all of China is under blue team control, meaning that all of China can be used to fight against the WICSO countries. Basically, modern China is here. Same thing with America, modern USA is here, and that, once again, is not a recipe for success for the WICSO countries. Notably, Russia's front line over here in the far east is going to, pretty much completely collapse. Oh, you can see how tolerance is my biggest enemy. Good God. Okay, I guess good enough. Anyway, though, this entire area will fall over. Russia will lose their occupation over here, simply because it's too far away for them to really manage effectively, now especially with, basically real-life China fighting on the side of the real world. Speaking of Russia, their front line in central China will begin to collapse, as we are now seeing the WICSO countries kind of, their militaries are at their limits. We do have to remember that this is 5 countries versus over 100 countries. Their populations, of course, are way outmatched by the real world. And no matter how strong you might have seemed in the series, the WICSO countries were inherently weaker than the real-life countries in comparison to their timeline. So that's to say that the 2026 countries in WICSO were a lot weaker than the 2026 countries in real life. It really wasn't into the more futuristic years, and especially when the Alternites arrived, that the WICSO countries surpassed real-life countries. And a lot of these countries here were before the Alternites and even before World War V in the series, which was a pivotal? You see, English isn't my thing. But it was a very important war because that's when technology really started to pick up in WICSO. The old empire is using World War III tech, very early on nukes, which aren't being used in this scenario. Same with Russia. The only really modern country here would be the Dutch team, who is still standing strong, and they've taken a majority of Europe, but as for everyone else, their technology is relatively behind. With that being said, though, I do realize now that this Dutch team is with alternate technology, so I didn't really consider that until right now. So, whoops. Yeah, I bet you didn't think about that either, although you probably did, because the WICSO fan base is way more knowledgeable of the series than I am, despite me making the series. But, if they had alternate technology, then, the rest of the world is probably fried, especially because they would share that technology with the other countries, and then, from there, it's wraps for the modern world. So once again, my bad for not factoring that in, but for the sake of keeping the pacing in this video, the Dutch team does not have alternate equipment. Get screwed. Ignoring my fault, though, coming back over here to the old empire, they are going to be completely kicked out of the South Asia region, and the blue team will continue to liberate a lot of their territory in this region. And that is because the front line is now shifting directly to the old empire, the resource heart of the WICSO countries. Without these guys, there's no oil for Russia and the Dutch team, although, Russia has its own oil, but still, their oil supplies would be heavily weakened, and those oil supplies would go over to the rest of the world, who is in a big need of oil. So, yeah, resource war in the Middle East. Where have I heard that one before? Anyway, the rural countries are going to start to push into the old empire here, and like I was saying earlier, the WICSO countries are starting to experience a lack of manpower. They are simply outnumbered by the rest of the real world, which it is important to know, once again, the WICSO countries were weaker than the real world, and they also had way smaller populations because, there was a nuclear war after World War III that killed a lot of people, so, population numbers aren't really great in these countries. That is assuming that they kept the actual WICSO population and their actual WICSO leaders, because it's hard to imagine that, I don't know, who would lead the old empire in this scenario? I guess the leader of Turkey? Is Erdogan, the leader of the old empire? Because that's really funny if he is. But I would assume that it's the actual populations from the WICSO world, so in that case, they do have smaller populations. Anyway, though, as you can see, the capital city of the old empire is in threat of being captured, and, if that happens, oh boy. But really, the big momentum shifter here was America and China switching sides over to the modern world, and that is why we see the capturing of the old empire's capital city. India is living through the spiritual connection they have with the Perse Indians and WICSO Indians, and they're beating the old empire. But with them losing their capital city, this will motivate the African military to move across the Suez Canal and begin to capture these cities over here in the Palestinian region. They'll also move up and capture some cities from Lebanon. They'll capture Damascus. And with the occurrence of that, the old empire is going to be weakened even more. Eventually, blue team forces over here will begin to move around the Persian Gulf coast, going straight towards Qatar and capturing that entire country. They'll then move down and capture the capital city of Saudi Arabia, before also making a landing and capturing Dubai from the UAE, as well as the capital city of Oman. They will then complete control over the Persian Gulf, and the old empire here is in desperate need of some help from Russia. Unfortunately, though, even with help from their WICSO allies, the real world is simply overpowering the WICSO. Unfortunately, though, even with the help of their WICSO allies, the real world is simply overpowering the WICSO world right now. Cyprus will be lost. The old empire is cut into multiple pieces. And with that, their front line over here in Central Asia will begin to collapse, as their forces that are stationed up in Central Asia will be forced to retract, making control go over to Russia. But even then, when the old Imperial forces begin to fight back against the blue team here, that very same blue team will start an offensive in from the eastern region to go ahead and just, hit them from a different angle. So, ouch. Ouchie, wow, wow. The old empire will now lose all of their claims over in Central Asia, leaving them very alienated down here in the southern region, which is arguably their most important area for cultural and religious and historical regions, but here, this region is very, very weak, so it's going to fall, leaving them only up to Turkey, the Caucasus, and parts in Europe. Around this time, though, we also see the real world start to push into Russian-occupied territory, and, not looking good. Especially as they now send forces across and invade into core Russian territory. Back over in the Middle East, the old empire is getting ready to collapse into a billion different countries, which happened in the series. They're now being pushed completely out of Turkey, and it's starting to be wraps for the WICSO world. This scenario is assuming a philosophy that I use a lot in certain scenarios. It's very inconsistent when I use it, but it's basically that if a country is taking control of the territory, so for example, if the modern world has control over this territory, they can then use its population and military to fight back against the other countries. I use this when it's very hard to decide the winner of certain wars. Like, once again, I was saying earlier, I wouldn't be too sure who would actually win this war realistically. So, by default, if you control territory, you can use the population and military from that territory to fight against the other side, even if that territory was originally on the opposing faction. That's why the WICSO countries were so strong to start, but started to wane as soon as the real world started to take back a lot of land. And that is why now we see that they are pummeling through all WICSO territory. The old empire now will officially surrender over to the modern world, and with that, they will lose all of their claims in Europe. That will go over to the Dutch team and Russia, respectively, meaning that undoubtedly, the old empire was indeed a fraud in WICSO. But don't worry, you're not the only country that is about to be exposed, old empire. Worry not at all. Because the modern world has now created a new doctrine called Kill Russia. It is literally called Kill Russia, and the doctrine says to kill Russia. I know, very original, very, very scary, but yeah, Moscow's gonna fall. And with the fall of Moscow, once again, the modern world is now going to make another doctrine called Kill the Dutch Team. And actually, they are in a very similar spot to World War II Germany now, because they don't have the resources to fight this war at all. And I don't have the tolerance to color this in. God damn! Okay, there we go. There's just a lot of pixels everywhere. Why are you like this? See, this is why I need a new map. This is horrible. Anyway, though, you guys probably know how this scenario is going to end now that Moscow has fallen. The blue team is going for the throat in both countries, and there goes the capital city of the Dutch. Yep, that's pretty much it. So after both countries experience great loss, and, you know, with 3 of their allies being gone, it is in their best of interest to officially surrender over to the rest of the real world. And I know, they still had a lot of land and they still had a lot of fight left in them, but when you're kind of facing scenarios like this where obliteration is on the menu, you just kind of have to, you know, you have to order it, you have to take it, and that's what they've done. I have no doubt that the real Dutch and Russian countries in WICSO would fight to the very end, just not here though. And the biggest decider in them losing this war was, in fact, the difference between the WICSO countries and the real world countries, how the WICSO countries were slightly behind the real world countries in technology and technically population. That all added up into them officially losing the scenario. Now, I will admit to you honestly that when I first started this video, I actually thought that the WICSO countries were going to win. But as the video went on, I kind of realized that, like, those factors were way more important than I had ever mentioned, and I don't even think I mentioned that at the start of the video. So while they do control modern land with, you know, modern facilities and stuff, they were still ultimately limited because they were gonna have to take the population of the WICSO world into the real world, something I didn't really even factor when I started this video. Once again, the alternative to that is Erdogan being in charge of the old empire, which, once again, very funny, but I think it's best if that doesn't happen. Anyway, though, the WICSO world will lose, and you can probably imagine what the peace treaty is going to look like. Yep, it's just back to normal now. But that is going to do it for today's scenario, where the top 5 strongest countries in WICSO go to war with the rest of the world. I know that it was a little bit inconsistent with what I was saying in the beginning compared to what I was saying toward the end. That is my bad on that one, especially with the whole alternate technology thing. I forgot completely to factor that in, which means that, you know, or I guess it really shows that I've been away from WICSO for way too long, but don't worry. I'm going to be picking up on the mapping series again very soon. If you don't know this, first of all, shame on you, but second of all, it's very important. I'm starting another mapping series on June 20th during the June daily upload week. I talked about all of this stuff in the summer schedule video that came up not too long ago. But yeah, that next mapping series is going to be very fun. I think I have a very cool concept for it. It's only going to be 20 episodes long, but it is going to be good. The story will be very rich, I hope. I haven't really started on it yet, but I know what's going to happen. I know how it ends. So I hope you guys are excited for that. I think you guys should be excited for that. It's going to be a little bit different. but I think it's going to be awesome. But with that being said, that is once again the end of this video. So I hope you guys did enjoy, and if you did, make sure to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel if you're new. As always, all the support is greatly appreciated. If you want to show even further support, make sure to check out our channel membership program, where you can get early access to each and every single one of our videos, as well as access to members exclusive content. Once again though, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next video. And of course, thank you to all our super fans. This includes V1AV Greek, A Norwegian, The Bellum Republic, Lazy Bones, Dex Slendy, CTG on YT, Terminator, Mr. Sabotage, Gail Martinez, Upgraded Bro, Green France Mapping, LCBFX Cooper, Choco Fur, Agisto, Coda, Other Coda, Shifty Mapping, Country W4M, Jazzy Jerboa, Nevada Garbage Trucks, Oz Geo Guy, Zaylance, Laser Taze, Pablo Sigma Cat, and Hammer Toad. Once again, thank you guys.